like 1 or 2 behind. I'll read a demo for you, but
I
Behind
have to
on
read,
the
I have to read chapter
yeah.
25 and then I can do those. Earl was reading and so I just kept reading. I just kept going.
Okay.
I'm still...
Let's go ahead and get started. I have for today what I want to do. I'm going to go ahead and try to zoom this in a little bit so our folks that are watching have a little bit better view.
Yeah, I was like, wait, what?
That makes that really bright. So I'm going to spend today kind of talking about your projects, she says as she tries to get the remote to work. Because I got it on the wrong camera.
He saves these.
Yeah.
No, I guess I'll go through. Watch the one from Thursday.
But they're not dated. I was so confused. Like, I'm assuming it's at the last.
I think I've got it, Jack.
You have to go to the
I just-
module.
You just happened to catch me when I was there. Look.
Okay.
All right, thanks.
I
And Troy, they get a good look at the back of you today too. So I wanted to spend just a little bit kind of talking about your projects and where we're going to head. I do have a handout that has kind of the summary of all of the project pages on it. And so I think that's going to be a good resource. So for the online students, you're probably going to want to print that off because I think it's helpful if you kind of think about, don't just think about, we're going to cover specifically project part A today, but as you're gathering information, you're going to want to be thinking about what you need for part B, or you're going to end up kind of having to go back and maybe double dip on some things. So I wanted to just start with some information. I know we started the semester, I used this book in class. The folks online haven't heard the story about Sarah and Allison yet, right? I'm going to go back to Sarah and Allison's story to talk a little bit about how that fits with your project today. So if you remember, Sarah and Allison were 2 women that were diagnosed with breast cancer. And so Allison took 42 days to get her diagnosis, and Sarah, because of the type of clinic that she went to, took a little over 2 hours to get her diagnosis, right? And so we were talking about how different the processes that they went through were. And so you've had a little bit of exposure to, our textbook and processes now, right? So we've been through the first 3 chapters. And so I want to talk to you about what the difference really is between those 2 processes that Sarah and Allison went through, okay? And the difference is where you focus, whether or not you focus on resource efficiency or flow efficiency, right? And so what we talk about when we talk about focusing on flow efficiency, which is what kind of lean is about, and it's what the goal is about, they're trying to focus on flow efficiency rather than resource efficiency. So if we think about the example from the goal, they have this robot, right? And this robot, they keep running stuff through it because they want to keep the robot at an efficient level, right? And so, but that creates more inventory in their system, which actually slows down the flow efficiency of things that are trying to flow through their system, okay? And so, one of the questions that they raise in this book is, well, which is better, flow efficiency or resource efficiency? And the bottom line is both are important, right? And so we're going to start your project and you're going to look at flow efficiency to begin with. And so chapters 3 and 4 are about flow efficiency. And then when we get into chapter 5, we kind of shift gears and we go back and we look at resource efficiency, because sometimes you're going to find a particular resource can be the bottleneck for your process. And that's important to understand where that's at as well. So, so the deal with Sarah and Allison, so if you were thinking about Allison's experience, and so she's the one that it took 42 days for, right? She had a lot of go do something and then wait, go do something and then wait, go do something and then wait, all right? And it's likely that they focused on resource efficiency. So the efficiency thing that they were most interested in is the equipment fully utilized? Are the doctors completely utilized? And they were less concerned about Allison's flow and how long it took her to flow through that process, right? And So as you're analyzing a process and you're thinking about it from a flow unit perspective, right, what you would do is you think about, well, if you're Allison, you're going to put a camera on Allison's shoulder and you're going to walk through that process with Allison. If that customer is your flow unit, okay? And so the same kind of thing as you define what your flow unit is, to get to flow unit efficiency, you're going to, and understand that, you're going to want to put a camera on whatever your flow unit is and document the steps that it goes through, okay? And then when we get into chapter 5, we'll flip perspectives and we'll look at resources, and we'll put the camera on the resource and we'll say, okay, now what's it like from this resource perspective, okay? So you're going to start out and you're going to be looking at from a flow unit perspective, okay? So there's a couple things I wanted to kind of touch on. So flow efficiency focuses on the unit process in an organization. And so in manufacturing, you can think of a unit could be a product comprised of different types of components that are processed in various ways to make a product. In services, okay, it's often a customer is what your flow unit might be, or it can also be information, right? So you can use, how does that information move through a service or a process, okay? So, and we talked about, that was part of what chapter 3 was about, was looking at what are all the different things that a flow unit can be, okay? Your project, you may need to look at more than one flow unit, okay? And just be aware that, maybe it's a customer, maybe it's a customer and maybe it's an order. Maybe you need to look at both of those. But those then require kind of two different tables because you've got different flow units, and so you have to have different sets of information for each type of flow unit, okay? And then, and we'll work on calculating flow efficiency coming up in chapter 4, so I don't want to get too far ahead of us from that. But, defining that process from the perspective of the flow unit is important so you can understand where you've got, and what we're going to get into is what we call value-added and non-value-added time. You don't need to spend, because we're going to hit that again in a later chapter, but I want you to be at least aware of when we talk about value-added time, what we're saying is it something that's actually transforming the customer? So if you looked at Allison's process of, going through all the examinations and how much time she had to wait in between, okay, waiting is always not value-added time, right? There's nothing happening to the flow unit that's moving it towards the end. It's just sitting there waiting, okay? And so that's kind of the easiest place to start to look at a process, to say, if I've got waiting time, how can I pull that out of the process? So that's the easy, low-hanging fruit. The second part is inside your activities, right? You're going to have different steps that are happening maybe inside an activity. So if I said, let's say grading exams is the process that I'm going to look at, and I say, well, the student takes the exam, they go up and sit on my desk until I find the time to grade them, right? There's the waiting time, okay? And then I sit down and grade them. Well, grading is one activity, but there's a lot of different things that take place inside that activity. So I grade the multiple choice, or I have someone in the office help me grade the multiple choice. I go through and grade the problems. I have to create the exam. So there's all these steps inside that activity. So inside that activity, you can also find waste, right? So for example, if we were going to use the grading the exams, if I choose to grade the multiple choice and the feedback to you, that information back to you in terms of what your grade is what's most important, I should probably utilize resources down here because they can grade the multiple choice while I grade the problems, right? So then I have two things happening in parallel, okay? And so I can take some time out of that process by, changing how I approach that, okay? And so, again, the easy one that I expect all of you to kind of find is when you document your process and it does this, and then it waits for the next thing to happen. Okay, well, how can we get rid of the wait? That's one. And then 2 is inside that activity step, how can we look at those activities and kind of start to identify, what's wasteful inside those activities, okay? And whenever you're in a situation where you say, we do this, and then sometimes we have to do this because this didn't get done right, red flag, right? There's waste, right? If you've got to redo something, so the look is, well, how do we go look at it to try to say, let's not have to redo that, okay? So again, those are just some examples of the types of waste that you're going to end up kind of looking for as you document your process. And so in Part A, we're just going to kind of do the broad overview, and as you dive into Part B, you're going to get into the more specifics of it, okay? And so, because the objective here is as you kind of move through the project, you're going to find your process diagram is probably going to transform a little bit. You're going to start out with kind of, here's the high level that so you've already done that in the identify the process, right? And then you're going to come into Part A and you're going to put in more detail of what you know about the process. And by the time you get to Part B, you're probably going to even have a few more steps. Or you may decide there's this one activity that we think there's waste in this, and so we want to dive into that a little bit deeper and get more information. So you want to be kind of thinking about, well, where do I think I'm going to need more detailed information as you're starting to map that process, okay? So again, I'll come back to Allison and Sarah as we kind of keep moving through the project, but I just kind of wanted to use that as an example. So what I thought I would do is just go ahead and I'm going to go ahead and open up a Word document, because I find that somehow I'm not as clear, I must not be as clear on this as what I think I am. So I'm going to be very clear this semester. And I want you to do your project, I want you to do it in a Word document, okay? You can run your calculations in Excel, but then you need to transfer the table that you're using into the Word document, okay? And so that you should have this kind of ongoing report that has the detail of it in the Word document. Don't you can send me an Excel document for backup if you want to have your calculations where I can just open them up and look at them, but I'm grading your Word document. I'm not grading your Excel document, okay? So inevitably I have people that send me like 3 or 4 different documents that they want me to look at, and I'm like, the objective here is one report, okay, and that you're just going to keep adding to it as you go, okay? And so for those of you that haven't used the kind of the tools in Word for a while, they're pretty helpful. So I'm just going to kind of refresh your memory. Like I can come up here and I can click on heading 1 and I can put in the title of my project. So that's example project. And then again, I've told you in business, it isn't about creativity, it's about clarity, okay? And so at least in this type of a project, that's what it's about. So, I'm going to then go heading 2, right? And I'm going to go project part A. And underneath that, I'm actually going to go to heading 3, right? And I'm going to go to, and I can either go 1 or A, and maybe A because that's how it's labeled in there. Identify the goal of your client, right? And then underneath that, tell me what the goal of your client is, right? And then add to that with a B, and so B is going to be identify the flow unit. So let's talk about the goal of your client real quick here. So this goal has to do with the text that you're reading, right? The supplemental text, the goal, all right? And so in the goal, right, there's a pretty clear expectation that for-profit companies, their goal is to make money, right? Some of you have non-profit organizations that you're actually doing your process on. And so, the goal for those companies, in my opinion, and over several years of doing these projects, we've kind of refined it to, they need to make the most utilization of the resources they have to better serve their customers, right? So it's not really about making money for them, it's about providing the best service, the most service that they can, given the resources that they have, okay? And so what I want you to do is I want you to take your project and identify how your project actually contributes to that goal. Because if it doesn't, it's probably not a good project, right? And in the business world, when you're working on projects, you should always be able to link what you're doing to why is this important, and it helps you prioritize what projects you want to work on, right? So for example, I'm just going to kind of show you from a previous semester. Here's the goal that we had a student. And I don't really want that to be... So, let's see if we can So I just want this to be normal, right? And so our client, Murray State University, is a nonprofit organization whose goal is to allocate all of its resources in the most effective and efficient way in order to ensure that their students receive the optimal educational experience. The financial aid department is one of these resources that contribute to that goal. So that's pretty broad. I would like that maybe to have been a little bit more specific about what project they're doing and how that's going to contribute specifically. But you can see they got the first part of it where they talked about Murray State being a nonprofit organization. They need to allocate their resources effectively. And so the project that they were doing had to do, and so that's what I would have probably liked to have seen, is they were doing with an SAP appeal process, okay? And so satisfactory academic progress appeal process is what the SAP stands for. And so I would have liked to have seen them continue on with that paragraph to say the SAP appeal process currently has, is not as efficient as, and this project will help us become, make that process more efficient, and therefore the resources can be utilized on different things, something along those lines. Does that make sense? Do you see where I'm kind of wanting you to go with that? Okay, so dive into that. So it's not just a one sentence answer. It's you need to frame up what the bigger picture is, and then how does your project contribute to that bigger picture. Okay, and so then B is identify the flow unit. And so I can either, a couple of things, if you want everything to be black in terms of you can come up here and you can, so this one was heading 3, right? And so if I want to modify the setting of that, I can come in here and I can say rather than it being blue, I want it to be black. Okay, and then that's going to change everything to black, and I can make that be heading 3 as well. Okay. And then underneath that, you're going to identify the flow unit or flow units. So what is it that what's going to be under study? So if it's a manufacturing process, you're probably going to be talking about the product that you're making. You might be talking about the information that it takes to make that product, right? You might be talking about a customer that comes into it if it's a service, right? Or you might be talking about, like in this case, they're talking about an appeal process. And so they're really taking the flow unit as kind of as the SAP document itself. And so they're putting the camera on that document and watching the steps that has to go through. So, basically they're just saying the flow unit in this project. So again, if I come here and I say I want it to be normal, and we say the flow unit will be the satisfactory academic appeals process. Okay? All right. And then the next part for C is identify your client's specific concerns, sometimes spelled concerns, regarding the process. Okay? And so by your client, I mean, who are you doing the work for? So Julie and Miranda would be talking to people in HR, and they'd be asking them, why is this project important to you, right? And that is also going to probably help you kind of refine your answer for A, right? Because they're going to tell you why doing this project is going to make their life better, okay? And so that's what you're trying to kind of answer there, all right? And so, in this project, these students answered with the client's concerns. The client's concern is that the SAP appeal process is too timely, which causes stress and uncertainty with students and their parents regarding their federal financial aid. The intent of this project is to determine if there is an area in the process in which its time could be reduced and that would have an overall impact on the total flow time of a student appeal. Okay? So, again, I think that pretty well. So this first part A isn't really that, you should be able to work through it in the time you've got probably on Thursday if you're familiar with the process at all. If you're not, you're probably going to need to be stepping out and contacting your client and trying to walk through with them. Help me understand this process a little bit more. Okay, and then so D is identify boundaries. Okay, so it's identify boundaries of the process to be analyzed with your client's input. And the reason that that's important is because now you're telling me where your process is going to start and stop. So if I talked about a manufacturing plant, I could start with the time raw materials come in the back door till the time the finished product goes out the front door, which would be a huge project, right? Or I could focus on a particular production line and say, okay, I want to look at the double hung 3 line. Okay, so that's one production line. Or I could say, I'm going to focus on the frame station at the double hung 3 line. All of those are acceptable processes to look at. They just have different boundaries, right? So you have to define where you're going to start and where you're going to stop, okay? And so that's kind of an important piece to your project, right? And so these students looked at this and said, the process begins at the moment a student submits an electronic appeal via their MyGate account. The process ends when their student account is updated with a decision made by the SAP Appeal Committee. We have analyzed 2 routes that an appeal could take, one being the direct route where the appeal needs no further documentation and is sent directly to the committee. So Lena was doing that part of it. And the second being the route that requires more documentation before the committee is able to review the process. Okay, and then the last, well, sorry, not quite. E on here is then to map the current process. And I will tell you, I'm going to show you their map. Now this is their revised map because they had to work on it multiple times, right? So this is what their kind of end document looked like. I'm not expecting your first one to look like that, but it's not atypical for that to develop as you continue to find out more and more about the process, right? And so, and again, I think what happened is they did this kind of first, and then they said, okay, this is where we think we have the opportunity. We probably need to dive into that part of it deeper. So they then split that out to tell us more about that particular step. That gives you a pretty good overview of what we're kind of looking for Part A. And you'll notice that, you know, they do have the buffers are in triangles, okay? And I'm just going to tell you that up front. We're going to learn that in Chapter 4. But you might as well start now, otherwise you're just going to have to go back and kind of revise as you do your diagram. So anytime you've got buffers, go ahead and put them in the triangles, activities are in rectangles, and then the decisions are in the diamonds, right? That's kind of the approach that they try to take, okay? So that kind of gives you a good overview of what you're doing in Part A. So I think that's very reasonable to think that you'll be able to get through that this week, right? The deadline for that project, if we looked at the syllabus, so Project A is due, I think, Monday night the 20th at the end of the day. My expectation is that you'll turn it in and have your document. If you've got questions, don't wait until Tuesday morning to ask me what those questions are. You need to be working on it throughout this week. That's what the week is set up for. And I'll just tell you, based on last semester's experience, I don't have much give on those deadlines, because my experience is every time I gave on the deadline, then students would just then wait for the next deadline, and they'd still not be done with the first set that they needed to get done. So if there's extenuating circumstances or you're having trouble contacting your client, you know, I'll work with you to a certain extent on that, but you need to be proactive with contacting your client. Don't come to me on Tuesday morning and say, well, I tried to talk to the client on Monday afternoon and they weren't available. Yeah, well, you know, you knew that you needed the information long before then. So try to be very proactive with working with your clients on that, okay? And then I think let's go ahead and just flip over to Part B, okay, of the project. And let's talk about, and I'm not going to go through it in detail, but let's look about what that consists of, all right? So I'm going to go ahead and open that document up. So basically, the expectation is that you are going to, whatever feedback you get on part A, you'll revise and incorporate that, and that's the very first thing there, okay? And then it's basically draw your diagram, only be more detailed, right? Now we're at a point where you're past that initial overview and you're going to keep adding more detail. So you want to make sure that you're using activities, buffers, and decisions, right, which we've talked about. And then I want to make sure that you actually have documented on your diagram the measures of flow time, the measures of inventory, and the measures of throughput on your diagram. Okay, so you don't have to have that in the very first in part A, but as you're moving into part B, those are going to be the expectations that you're going to include that. Okay, be sure that your process diagram represents a nonlinear nature, meaning there's usually going to be an offshoot. If there's not, you can touch bases with me, and I may okay it or I may not. I may say, well, we need to look for a little more complexity there. Okay. And then beneath the diagram, provide any details on how you gather the information. So for example, that's where you tell me what your assumptions are or what data you gathered, right? Well, I went and we got 10 estimates of how long it took to do this activity, and we took the average of those 10, right? Or however you came up with the data that you're putting on your diagram, okay? And then C is create a table of inventory, throughput, and flow time, which is going to tie to that diagram, which we've already started doing, right? We did some of that in chapter 3. And so now you're just going to be creating the table for your project, okay? And so, again, inventory, throughput, and flow time on the table, okay? For each activity and buffer, you should have 2 pieces of information. Most of you are going to find that you're going to have throughput for the entire operation, right? And so you're going to start your throughput at the beginning of the process, and that's going to be the same amount, whether or not it comes out all on one path or 2 paths or 3 paths at the end, but you should have this throughput that comes in and this throughput that comes out, and they should match, right? And so that's one piece of information that you're most likely to have across every step of the process, is you're going to know how much throughput there is. Oftentimes, it's easiest, in particular in manufacturing environments, to time the activity steps and to count the inventory and take an average of inventory, okay? In informational processes, so I'm going to look at this side over here for sure on that. Sometimes it's easier just to have people attach a sticker to a document and estimate how much time. Because yours is a once-a-month process, you just may ask them, what do you think on average it takes you to do that, right? And so again, that's going to be, you're going to document that in your assumptions, all right? So there's no one true way. So don't feel like there's one true way. There is a way to get there. And if you're struggling with what the best way to get there is, that's a good time to call a friend. So consider me your friend on the project up until the due date, and then I get crabby. If you haven't contacted me before the due date to let me know there's a problem, that's when it doesn't sit very well with me. So if you're having trouble, you know, again, work on it as we're progressing, all right? So sometimes you'll find that the unit of measure for throughput is not a good match for your flow time, right? And we saw that where we were talking about maybe minutes versus hours or minutes versus days, right? And just do a conversion and document what your assumptions are on the conversion. So if you need to convert your throughput to minutes, right? Because like for especially Julie and Miranda, where they do that process once a month, right? You might have this whole flow time in months, and the activities times are, you know, the wait time could be months, the activity time could be minutes, and you're just going to have to convert to whatever makes the most sense, okay? And that's, and it isn't unheard of for you need to bounce between the two. Like one time you need to talk about minutes because the activities only take minutes, and in the next you need to talk about something in weeks or months because that's what it makes the most sense. So there's nothing wrong with that. Just make sure that you document how you get there, okay? And again, I'm looking for, you'll see at the end of each one is there's 10 points for professional and cohesive report submitted in one document, okay? And so, for example, if I need to copy something into Excel, right? So let's look down here. I'm sure they've got a table here, yeah. So they did a really awesome job on their table. This is not normally what I get. So they're basically telling me in green might be the information that they had, and in beige is what they calculated. And so Lena was from Germany. I'm just here to tell you German students typically are a cut above in terms of detail. So again, they did a really good job with their table, but they did this in Excel, and then they copied and pasted it into Word. Okay, you can paste special, a lot of times when I copy into Word, I don't, you can either copy it in as an object or a picture. And a lot of times I do a picture, because I find when I copy in an object, it doesn't always keep the same shape and size that I want when I go to different, when different, like if I have students that are opening it on laptops, if I have it a document, it can whack out. And so I just copy it as a picture. But that means you can't work with it, then you have to go back to Excel and make any changes and put it back in Word. So, those choices are up to you. But again, I think that's an important skill set to have, and understand how to combine that stuff in one document. So I think we've done a pretty good overview of parts A and B. Don't just focus on A only. Be kind of thinking out about what you need for B and working through that. It's probably going to take more than one conversation with your client to kind of get figured out where you need to be. So put that into your schedule. My intent is I'll be around and on Thursday for sure. And if you need to meet with me any other time, shoot me an email, and I'm pretty flexible. Tuesdays and Thursdays I teach at 9:30, 12:30, and 3. 9:30, 12:30, and 3. So, okay? Yes, Miranda.
I have a question about part B. I know it's ahead of time, but
with
the flow diagram, are we just editing the one from part A?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So do me a favor, just edit.
Don't put
because
another
otherwise,
one in there.
yeah. Otherwise, I end up, and I've had that before, and there's nothing really wrong with that. It's just, to me, it makes more sense to just edit the one that you have in part A and keep kind of revising it. Okay. Any questions? Any other questions? Okay. All right, you can do it. I have faith. All right, that's all I've got for today. So you can, if you've got some things you want to work on with your project or questions you want to ask me, I'll be around for that.
Yeah, I know this doesn't, my project does not look like that right now.